In this video, we'll cover Spring Boot properties. Spring Boot can be configured in the application.properties file. So some of the properties you can set is that you can actually set up the actual server port, the context path, actuator endpoints, security settings, and so on. And in fact, Spring Boot has over 1,000 properties. Wowzers. But hey, don't worry. This slide here actually has a list of the common properties here. So lovetocode.com/springbootprops, it'll actually redirect you to the official Spring Boot documentation that has a list of those common properties, and you can drill down and get more details on those given properties. But don't let those 1,000 plus properties overwhelm you or scare you. The properties are roughly grouped into the following categories. So you have the categories of core, web, security, data, and then you also have actuator, integration, dev tools, and testing. So that's kind of the logical grouping of those different properties that are out there. And what we'll do here is we'll actually review some of the properties just so you can see how they're used, become accustomed to them, and so on. Okay, so let's start with the core properties. So again, in this application.properties file, we can set up the logging levels and set up different severity mappings for those given packages or for those given projects. So for example, if you'd like to set up the logging level for the org.spring framework, set it to debug. You could set org.hibernate to trace levels, and you can also set com.lovetocode to info level. So basically you're setting these logging levels based on the actual package name. And this applies to all sub packages for those given projects or package names. And then as far as the different logging levels that are out there, you can set trace, debug, info, warn, error, fatal, and off. You could also have the data sent to a given specific log file as far as output. So instead of the regular console, you can give the file of mycrazystuff.log, and all the information will be stored in that given log file. Now, if you'd like to get more details on Spring Boot logging, just access the link here on the page, lovetocode.com/springbootlogin. It'll give you the official Spring Boot documentation for actually performing all the different logging configurations and so on. Next, we can take a look at some of the web properties. So again, in this application.properties file, we can actually set up the actual port that the server will listen on. So by default, the port is 8080, but you may want to change it to listen on a different port here. So I'll say server.port equals 7070. We can also change the context path of the application. So the actual default is just a /, but here we'll give an actual context path of /mysillyapp. So then that means that when you actually access your application in the web browser, we give localhost :7070, that's the port, / the context path, mysillyapp, and then / whatever endpoints you're going to access, like our Fortune or our Workout or whatever. We can also set another property here, like the default HTTP session timeout. Set that to 15M. That's basically 15 minutes. So M is short for minutes. Now let's take a look at some of the properties we can set for actuator. And you've seen some of these already, right? So you can set up the endpoints to include. So we could give the endpoints by name or by wildcard. So I'll have include equals star. We can also give endpoints to exclude by the name or wildcard. So here I'll say .exclude equals beans, mapping. We can also set up the base path for the actuator endpoints. So the actual default is /actuator. So when we access it via our web, we say localhost : whatever our port name is, 7070 /actuator /health. And you can easily change that value to anything you'd like for your actual actuator endpoints. And then you can set up some security properties here. So we saw earlier how we could secure the REST endpoints for the Spring Boot actuator, making use of the default username. So here we can actually provide a different default username. We say username equals admin, and we can also set up a default password. So instead of using that generated password by Spring Boot, we can give the user.password equals top secret. And remember earlier, I also mentioned that you can easily customize this to make use of our normal Spring security work or Spring security configuration, where you can basically hook in databases, roles, encrypted passwords, and so on, just using the same information that we did earlier in the course for setting up custom Spring security. And also Spring Boot has support for some data properties here. So in your application.properties file, we can go ahead and set up like the JDBC URL. So this data source.url equals JDBC MySQL, localhost, e-commerce. We can set up the username of Scott and the password of Tiger. And then we'll actually get into more of this later when we move into Spring Boot for data access, Spring Boot data, and all that good stuff. And we'll cover more of this. We'll actually have slides and videos that covers how to use the data properties. So don't worry, I got you covered. And again, just as a reminder, a list of the common Spring Boot properties are available here at the link lovetocode.com/springbootprops. All right, so now with our development process, what we're going to do in the next section here is we'll actually modify Spring Boot. We'll configure the server port to listen on a different port, and then we'll also configure the application context path. And so we'll cover this in the next section. We'll do it hands-on just so you see how to make some modifications here to Spring Boot and set up the configuration. So I'll see you in the next section.